Welcome to the OMG Tarot podcast. I'm your host, Lindsay, aka OMG Tarot. Today, we're talking about the Magician. The Magician is number 1 in the major arcana, but he's not actually the first card. That honor goes to the Fool, number 0. As number 1 in the major arcana, the Magician is at the very beginning of his journey. Things are very fresh and new for him, and that theme is going to come up quite a bit when we take a look at the symbols in this card. Just a moment ago, our protagonist was the Fool, ready to jump off a cliff into the abyss, not knowing where this journey was going to go, and now we see that first step. In this case, the first step largely involves mastering one's tools. Probably the first thing you noticed on this card was what's on our Magician's table. We have symbols of the 4 minor arcana suits, and as we discussed in the Temperance episode, these are symbols of the 4 elements. We have our cup, which symbolizes the element of water. We have our pentacle, which symbolizes the element of earth. We have our wand, which symbolizes the element of fire. And we have a sword, which symbolizes the element of air. In this card, much like in Temperance, this reference means that this figure has access to all 4 elements, and that there's this idea of having the power to use them and combine them and twist them and manipulate them in ways that enable you to shape your reality. Another theme that we see here that we also find in Temperance is this idea of creating harmony between the different realms. We see that symbolized in our Magician's pose. Take a look at how he's got one arm up and the other arm down, pointing upwards at the sky as well as down at the ground. That pose is symbolic of the idea of as above, so below. And what that means is that the things happening in the physical realm affect the things happening in the spiritual realm, and vice versa. As a magician, and a person who's standing here with all the elemental tools at his disposal, this person can be interpreted as someone who's playing with that fabric between the spiritual and the physical. Because remember, the Fool's Journey, that term that we use to describe the entirety of the major arcana, is really about a spiritual journey, and it's about you as a person and finding your place between who am I as a literal human being and who am I as a spiritual being. And although I described what he's doing as play, it's important play. In fact, it's work. And through doing this work, the Magician is developing skills that he's going to rely on for the remainder of his journey. That's what's symbolized by the lemniscate, or infinity symbol, that we see right above our Magician's head. It's also the reason why I chose to do the Magician this week. I thought, following up after Strength and our discussion of that lemniscate, taking a look at it in the context of another major arcana card would be a good way to illustrate what Pamela Coleman Smith meant when she included it in her designs. Let's take a look at another symbol that links this card with another card in the major arcana. Take a look up at our Magician's right hand. We see he's holding a double-ended white wand that maybe it's a candle. I've seen it interpreted both ways. Those do look like flames, don't they? Either way, whether it's a candle or a wand, pay attention to which hand this is in. It's in his right hand, and in a few episodes now, I've mentioned how in tarot cards, the right hand is typically associated with what you project outward and what you're putting into the world, versus the left hand, which is how you receive. How do you receive input? How do you receive inspiration? We can interpret this as our Magician, with his hand that's pointing down at the ground, is receiving up earthly wisdom and earthly knowledge and perhaps even earthly experience, and then directing it upward through his right hand to project out all of that experience into something more meaningful and more spiritual. We also see this double-ended wand on the very last card in the deck, the World. Take a look at the World. If you notice, she's got one of these wands in each of her hands. Contrast that, the very last card in the deck, with a figure who's got this wand in both hands, with this card, which is very, very early on, and he's got it in one hand. How do you think you might interpret that? Just knowing what we know about tarot and what we know about the visual vocabulary of this deck and what Pamela Coleman Smith illustrated into it, or what other artists have illustrated into it as well, because you might be working with a different deck, and your symbolism might be a bit different. I'm reading this as our magician, being very early on, is still in a very tangible place. He's young, he's new, he's fresh, he's really just kind of taking his first steps into this world of spirituality and mysticism and using his intuition. He's really relying on what practical experiences have I had so far, and how do I understand them in terms of how do these fit into what are my goals and what am I going after? Versus we go all the way to the end to the world, and she's done the whole journey. She's been there, done that, got the t-shirt, and she's not wearing it because she's naked. But this lady, she's got both spiritual input and output. She's had those experiences that include things like the Death card and the Hermit and the Star. And now she's putting that back out. She's perpetuating the cycle. And this idea of the Fool's Journey being a cycle that continually starts and finishes and starts again just in one never-ending cycle is one that we're going to see quite a lot. We also see it referenced in the Wheel of Fortune, but I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. We see a small reference to this idea in this card. So take a look. Look closer at what the magician's wearing. He's wearing all white and he's wearing red, and we're going to talk about them in a moment. But look at his belt. Have you noticed something about his belt? It's not just a belt. It's a snake that's biting its own tail. In fact, there's a name, and it's called an Ouroboros. Why is this guy wearing an Ouroboros as a belt? Because the Ouroboros is an important symbol. The Ouroboros symbolizes the eternal cycle of creation and destruction and recreation and destruction again just to create again over and over and over. So it's a reference to I'm fitting into this cycle and I'm going to continue to perpetuate it, and we're going to come back to the starting point again sometime in the future. This is symbolic of the magician's power. The magician is a very powerful person, but they haven't quite realized their potential yet. That's key to understanding this card, because remember, we're only at point 1 in the major arcana. There are still a lot of lessons to get through. And the magician really has that potential, but they don't have the experience. Not yet, at least. We can see this idea of power and its intersection with experience in the color symbolism in this card. So take a look at the predominant color scheme. We have a lot of yellow here, and yellow is typically associated with joy and brightness and enthusiasm, and our magician is enthusiastic about engaging with the tools on their table and really stepping into their power and moving forward. But let's take a look at the other primary colors here. We see a lot of red and a lot of white, and it's in 2 different important places. We have it in flowers at the bottom of the card, which are some red roses and some white lilies of the valley, and then we see that color scheme repeated in the magician's outfit, a white robe worn underneath a loose, flowing red robe. In tarot, white symbolizes purity. It symbolizes something that's new and not yet corrupted and very fresh and clean. Notably, if you skip ahead, take a look at death. There's quite a lot of white in an otherwise somber-looking card. And without getting too far ahead of ourselves, that's symbolic of death isn't coming with moral judgment. Death, as it's depicted metaphorically in tarot, comes for everybody. It's not a murder, it's not a revenge killing, it's simply part of the cycle. And interestingly, Death's horse has red eyes. So we see this pattern of red and white as a color combination repeated in a few places, but I just think it's really interesting that we have it so prevalent here in the Magician, and then we see it referenced a bit later in the card that is arguably one of the biggest turning points in the major arcana. But enough about death. While white is symbolic of purity and innocence and freshness, red is symbolic of passion and drive and motivation. The Magician is bringing those 2 things together in this card. We have this young, inexperienced figure. That inexperienced figure has a lot of passion and a lot of potential and will go very far. When you read The Magician, think about all of these themes. Think about this idea of lots of potential, but perhaps a lack of experience. Think about also having access to the tools that you need to really pursue what it is you're after, and think of the idea of being at the very beginning point in a cycle. So, this card could symbolize, say, being freshly out of college and starting your first job that's relevant to what you studied. You have enthusiasm and you have that degree in hand, so you have the practical knowledge, but you don't yet have the hands on experience of actually working in that field. That experience will come eventually, but you don't have it yet. We can see this illustrated really well when we drop the Magician into the Major Arcana. As I mentioned earlier, the Fool comes before the Magician. The Fool is excited and enthusiastic and has absolutely no idea where he's going or where he's going to end up. Take a look at the Fool. He looks like he's about to fall off the cliff. The Fool's not even aware that he's about to start on a spiritual journey, and he's not even aware of what tools he has at his disposal. All the Fool has is that little bindle he's got slung over his back. We have no idea what's in there, but we do see its size relative to our Fool. The Fool's not packing very much. The Fool does not have much baggage that he's bringing on this journey with him. Then let's take a look at who comes after the Magician. We have the High Priestess, and she's a very notable visual departure from the Magician. She's clad in colors like blue and silver and white, and she has a very different look and feel. The High Priestess sits at a gateway. She's right there between those two pillars, and those pillars symbolize entering into the spiritual world. She's the Magician's first encounter with the mystical and the unknown and all the lessons that he's going to continue to learn as he progresses through the Major Arcana. This is really the first opportunity for our Magician to use those tools he's got on the table. We can even read this progression from the Fool through the High Priestess as stage 1, we're unaware. We're not even conscious of where we're going. We're just running through the tutorial stage, smashing buttons, seeing what's going to happen. Then we reach the Magician, and we become aware of the tools that we have at our disposal, and a bit more aware of what's the purpose. Why do I have these tools? What's the point of this journey that I'm going to go on? Then step 3, we reach the High Priestess, and it's more solidifying your purpose. It's, I'm consciously choosing to go on this spiritual journey. I see what's possible. I've met the High Priestess, and this is the point where I'm going to say yes or no with regard to whether or not I pass through that gateway and explore further. The Magician is the first card we've covered that's not associated with a zodiac sign. That doesn't mean there are no astrological associations in this card. The Major Arcana cards that aren't associated with zodiac signs are associated with planets. That's true of our Magician. The Magician is associated with the planet Mercury. Now you might be wondering, what's the difference and how does this affect how I read the card? This is where having some knowledge of astrology comes into play. And you don't need to be an astrologer to be a tarot card reader. In fact, you don't have to know anything about astrology to be able to read cards effectively, but if you do, it can add an additional layer of understanding to the symbolism present in the cards and help you really conceptualize the card's energy. Similarly, understanding numerology can make you better at reading tarot because there's a whole lot of crossover between these different practices. So in astrology, you've got planets and you've got signs. And each sign has one, and possibly two, depending on the sign, ruling planets. Think of the planets as actions. They're fixed energies. So, for example, Mercury is the planet associated with thoughts and speech, and it's how do I use my brain to think of things and then use my voice to speak the things I'm thinking of. It's a very communicative planet, and everybody has Mercury somewhere in their chart. So if the planets are actions, the signs are ways of doing those actions. I'll give you a quick example. Pretty much everyone, even those of us who know absolutely nothing about astrology, know our sun sign. That's the sign associated with what day you were born. So, for example, if your birthday is April 15th, you're an Aries. The sun is a planet in astrology, and the action associated with the sun is to be. Think of it as the verb I am. to be. You are. It's the core essence of who you are. And because you were born on April 15th, the time of year that the sun is moving through the zodiac sign of Aries, at your core, you embody Aries traits. So think of things like aggression, action-oriented, fiery, very let's go, let's get up, let's do it. Aries is someone who likes getting up at 5 a.m. to go on a run. But your sun sign is just one piece of your chart. There's also Mercury, and the house that Mercury is in and the sign ruling that house determine how you speak and how you communicate. So let's say, for example, our person who's an Aries sun has Mercury in Pisces. That person might be outwardly very energetic. Maybe there's someone who has a difficult time sitting still. But with that Mercury in Pisces, you'll get a lot of intriguing analogies and vivid imagery. I'll probably talk more about astrology in future episodes. In fact, I'm going to ask that in the poll on this episode, so if you care, either way, vote. Anyway, let's bring it back to tarot cards, and why is that relevant? I would read this very subtly, a card associated with a planet as more about doing that action, and a card associated with a sign as more about embodying that sign. So here's the difference. And again, this is why I would read it subtly, and keep in mind when we do tarot card readings, it's quite rare, at least in my practice, to pull just one card and to have that card be the entire spread. Typically, we're pulling multiple cards, and there's minor arcanas, and there's court cards, which are part of the minor arcana, and they all come together to create the full picture of your tarot card reading. So I would read this slightly nuanced difference as a card like the Magician, that's a planet. It's the actions of Mercury. So it's, what am I thinking? And what am I speaking? What am I bringing forth into the world through my thoughts and through my will? Because really the Magician is a lot of that idea of what power am I exerting? What am I moving out quickly and efficiently? Because Mercury is a quick mover. Mercury is the messenger god, so it's here and there and back and forth. It's also the planet closest to the sun. So when you pull up the Magician in a spread, think about that type of energy. Think about doing and bringing forth that power and communicating what you've dreamt up and what you've thought up and having that power to bring it to fruition. Versus then, let's compare it to a card that's associated with a zodiac sign, like all of the cards that we've looked at so far. So let's compare the Magician versus the Lovers, because they're linked on that level. While the Magician is associated with the planet Mercury, the Lovers is associated with Gemini, which is ruled by Mercury. Both have strong themes of mental acuity and communication. But I'd say the Magician's a little bit more about the Mercury themes of that mental acuity and communication, versus the Lovers is a little bit more about, well, who is Gemini? Gemini is the partners, the twins, the connectors. So I'd say that's more about the literal social application of those Mercury themes. So when the Magician comes up in a reading, what does it mean? I often read it to mean you have the tools that you need to accomplish what you desire to accomplish, but you don't yet have the experience. You can also read it as there's a lot of potential here, and there are a lot of really great things going for you, or for, if we're reading more about a thing or a desire or a task, there's a lot of really great potential in that. However, similarly, it's still at that potential stage. We still have to nourish it and push it further. So I think this card can speak to self-awareness and maybe even a check yourself in the sense of, hey, I see your passion here, and I also see your lack of experience. So just keep that awareness of you don't know what you don't know. However, that doesn't mean you shouldn't try. So let's try it out in a couple of readings. Let's say I want to pull a single card, and I'm pulling with the question of, what do I need to know today? What's the overall energy for today? So we shuffle and, oh, there's the Magician. I'd say embrace your power today and embrace your potential, and maybe try and find ways to use the tools that you currently have in unique and more productive ways. But you all know me by now, and you know that the readings I prefer to do are the bigger ones and the ones that combine different themes. So let's do another reading to pair with the Magician and really see this guy in action. How about my credit card got stolen? Uh-oh! What should I do about it? So we shuffle, shuffle, shuffle. And I just pulled the Two of Cups with the Magician. Huh. All right. So I think you need to lean on whoever's closest to you. I think you might maybe have a friend or a partner who's going to be able to help you out with this credit card situation. Maybe this is even about your partnership with your bank. But what I'm also seeing in these two is this sense of slow your roll a bit. Honestly, whoever that friend or partner is, yeah, you really got to lean on them because they're going to make this better. Maybe they're the one who stole your credit card and they're using it without your authorization. Maybe you need to have a talk with them. In any case, I'm looking at our Two of Cups here, which has the two people just connecting their emotions and sharing with each other. They're sharing a cup, and then we have, right up above that, we have that caduceus sign, as well as that winged lion. So I'm reading this as, are they going to help you heal? Are they going to really help you recover? Maybe this is a literal sense of recovering, not we're going to recover in the medical sense, but we're going to recover that credit card. And bringing it back to the magician, this guy uses all the tools at his table, and the reason I'm saying slow your roll is because I kind of feel like this magician is like, all right, I've got all the tools at my disposal. I've got the fraud alert. I've got a bot sweeping the dark web trying to find where's my credit card information being accessed. Like, this magician is on it, and I think maybe their friend, lover, whoever they might be, might step in and be like, wait, hold on, let's use logic. And who knows, maybe the friend has the credit card. Maybe our main character here got drunk and left it in an Uber, and then their friend was like, oh, you're going to want that. But yeah, our magician is ambitious, and our magician is enthusiastic and excited to use all these neat tools that he's got on his table. And he's also excited to be part of something bigger and being part of a cycle. But he's got a lot of lessons ahead of him. And we see those lessons illustrated in the rest of the major arcana. So that about wraps it up today for our discussion on the magician. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you learned something. And if you want to reach out, hit me up on Instagram. My handle is its_OMG_tarot. You can also head over to my website, omgtarot.com, where you can read my blog, you can contact me, you can learn a bit more about me and my practice, whatever you'd like. So yeah, see you next time.